Princess Melody made her debut in what has become one of the best Disney sequels of all time, The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea. The movie showed Melody as a curious and misunderstood child who was mysteriously drawn to the sea for reasons that she couldn't understand until she discovered the truth behind her family's lineage. Throughout the movie, Melody was just as kind as her mother and just as charming as her father. But after thinking about it for a while, it looks like there might be a hidden darkness to her character that nobody knew about that it turns out is directly tied to a fault in her bloodline. When you think about it, it's not too crazy to suggest that Melody had some evil inside of her that just hadn't manifested itself yet in the film. In fact, when you consider the timing of her birth and the death of the evil sea witch Ursula, it might even be possible for Melody to have been a manifestation of Ursula's energy that was released into the world when she died. Even if that wasn't necessarily the case, though, Melody still would have at least been related to one of the more terrifying villains in Disney history, Ursula. If she had survived long enough, Ursula would have been Melody's great aunt. But even after the witch's death, they still remained connected through blood since Ursula was Triton's sister. This means that the darkness that lurked within Ursula would also be present inside Melody, whether she realized it or not. In fact, Ursula wasn't the only member of that family that caused problems. If you remember correctly, King Triton himself also had a bit of a mean streak. Not only did he banish his own sister from Atlantica, but he was also known to take out his anger on sailors by creating raging storms out at sea. So, no matter how you look at it, there was a sense of evil that was present throughout their family genes, and probably even came down from the god Poseidon, who was Triton and Ursula's father. And that means that even though Melody never really showed signs of being outright evil, there was definitely a sense of darkness within her that was passed down through her bloodline. There's actually even a chance that Disney symbolized that Melody was meant to have darkness lurking inside of her through the color of her hair. While Melody wasn't the only member of her family to have dark brown, almost black hair, when you take a look at Disney villains throughout history, many of them tended to have darker hair or superficial characteristic. Now, that might be just a coincidence, but it's not like there were only one or two villains with dark hair, but more than half of them. This includes characters like Mother Gothel, Shan Yu, Gaston, and even Cruella de Vil. Well, sort of. That one's debatable because her hair is half and half, but even villainous animals like Scar have dark hair compared to their typically heroic counterpart and adversary. This has led to the speculation that Melody was originally designed to have a bit of a darker story than the one that ended up making it into the movie. Now, this trend of dark hair being representative of evil hasn't been confirmed by Disney, but when you consider how much time and effort goes into the character design for even the smallest of side characters, the creators at Disney certainly might have created an aesthetic pattern. So it's not outlandish to consider the idea that Melody's dark hair is reminiscent of the evil and darkness that lies within her blood. On top of that, like most great Disney villains, Melody had an obsession that drove her to turn away from the advice of those around her. And for Melody, her obsession came from the sea itself. In the movie, she was clearly drawn to it just as much as her mother was drawn to the surface. Only in Melody's case, she was unaware of why she was so fascinated with the water. Nobody would tell her that she was really a mermaid and the descendant of the king of the sea. Instead, they tried to keep her away from her passion, but she continued to obsess over it until she outright broke her mother's rule and headed out to find answers on her own. Now, that might seem like the origins of a super dark storyline, but when you compare Melody's obsession and her lashing out to the obsessions of other Disney villains, you might see some similarities. For instance, Melody's own blood relative, Ursula. She was obsessed with power and taking back what she felt was rightfully hers, which was her brother Triton's Trident and the kingdom of Atlantica. Ursula tried everything to get her hands on what she was obsessing over, and it seems like her great niece was willing to do that same thing. Granted, just not on as villainous of a scale. Or take a look at another dark-haired Disney villain, such as Gothel, who allowed her obsession with eternal youth to drive her to kidnap and raise a child in a secret tower in the middle of the woods. This is certainly another great example of a character who lets obsession drive them to do the exact opposite of what anyone in their right mind would do. Just like how Melody's obsession led her to venture out in a teeny tiny boat into the middle of the sea, as if that wasn't a horrifying decision. And perhaps that need to give in to her obsession came from the same darkness that drove Ursula and other villains to do their dastardly deeds. It should be noted that it wasn't only her appearance and obsessions that made it seem like Melody may have a connection to darkness. You see, it was also the differences that she had with her mother. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel was depicted as a super kind-hearted mermaid who seemed to have many positive social qualities about her, but her daughter, on the other hand, was portrayed as the opposite. In the sequel to The Little Mermaid, it was apparent that Melody had trouble fitting in with the other children, and not like Ariel did. In case you don't remember, Ariel wasn't quite like the other mermaids because, unlike them, she was fascinated by humans. Other than that, though, she fit right in amongst the merfolk of Atlantica. Melody, on the other hand, didn't fit in or seem to get along with the children that she was around in the movie. She was clearly an outcast despite being the princess, and oddly enough, it didn't seem to bother Melody too much. Well, that's not entirely true. Any kid is going to be bummed out when they are left out or made fun of, but in Melody's case, she seemed more like she didn't want to be around the other kids just as much as they didn't want to be around her. Perhaps this is because she was more in tune with a part of her bloodline that detested humans. That same gene was also present in Triton and Ursula as well, meaning that not only was Melody genetically drawn to the sea, but also held on to a sense of hatred that came directly from her bloodline. There's been talk of Melody's connection to Ursula, but interestingly enough, her connection to Morgana may have also been an indication of a darker side of Melody that nobody got to see. While the young princess seemed to get along with Ursula's sinister sister when Melody was lured to Morgana's Fortress of Solitude, it turns out that wasn't the first time that the two met, and it wasn't the first time that Melody seemed strangely calm around a horrifying-looking sea monster. Think about it, up until that point, Melody hadn't come into contact with anything like Morgana, at least not that she could remember, so you would think that she would have been terrified at the sight of a half-human, half-octopus hybrid, but instead she acted as if she was looking at something that was completely normal. And if this theory is right, that's because Melody sensed a dark connection between her and Morgana that boiled down to their bloodline. Perhaps the more notable moment that you could see a strange connection between the princess and the sea witch was in the beginning of the movie, though. It was when Morgana first appeared out of the sea in an attempt to kidnap Melody and use her as leverage to get the trident away from King Triton. During that scene, Melody was just a baby. However, she was a baby that showed no fear in the face of near death. Instead of crying or screaming instinctually, Melody seemed super happy to be in the arms of her estranged great aunt. The entire time that Morgana was swinging the child around in the air and even holding her over the open maw of a giant shark, she had a very happy smile on her face. And yes, it could be argued that she was a baby that didn't know what was going on, but even if that was the case, she still likely would have gotten freaked out at one point or another when she was swinging in the air over the open sea, especially since Ariel and everyone else looked so scared. Babies pick up on that sort of thing, and if she was a normal child, she would have been a little more scared or upset, but perhaps she sensed a deep connection between herself and Morgana, so Melody didn't feel as if she was in danger. Now, even if this theory is true, and Melody did have darkness lurking within her due to her bloodline and her connection to Ursula, it's clear that the good and kindness inside of her won out in the end. Throughout The Little Mermaid 2, Melody was never shown to be outright villainous or evil, most likely because she could tell what was morally right from wrong. Her mother Ariel instilled the proper values into Melody and made sure to instill her with kindness in her heart, which had no trouble triumphing over any possible darkness that dwelled within. What do you think, though? Did Melody have a secret darkness dwelling inside of her through her blood ties to the villainous sea witch that just so happened to die shortly before Melody was conceived? Or was she simply the daughter of a princess struggling to find her place on both the land and in the sea? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.